Welcome to this special episode of Inside Iraq from Washington. I'm Jassim Azzawi. Scrambling to salvage some credibility for his presidency, President Bush is sending more than 20,000 U.S. troops to Iraq. This time, we shall have enough troops to stabilize the country, he claims. His critics cry, it is too late and too little. No more restrictions on our military operations, he vows. Security is paramount and the Iraqi sovereignty will have to take a second seat. Radical cleric Muqtada Sadr is in the crosshair of the U.S. side. Yet, will Baghdad descend into even more violence if the firebrand Muqtada is physically eliminated? Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri Al-Maliki makes all the right noises. But will he use the Iraqi army to fight the militias and give his military commanders the necessary orders? Or will he flinch and choose to step down? Here is Ayman Muhyiddin.
A man and his plan, and perhaps the final chance to salvage U.S. involvement in Iraq and secure a positive presidential legacy. That's the predicament George W. Bush finds himself in after nearly 4 years of war, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi casualties, and 3,000 U.S. military deaths. On Wednesday, the president presented his revamped strategy aimed at stopping the killings in Baghdad and stabilizing Iraq.
So I've committed more than 20,000 additional American troops to Iraq. The vast majority of them, 5 brigades, will be deployed to Baghdad.
At the core of the new strategy, to bring an end to the ethnic killing engulfing the capital, and to do so, the Iraqi forces and their American backers will have to decisively disband militias, and the most powerful of them, the Mahdi army, led by Muqtada al-Sadr.
I'd say he's the single most powerful individual in the country in that sense, militarily.
For months, President Bush has said Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri Al-Maliki is the right man for the job. President Bush's new strategy sets key benchmarks for the Iraqi government that the White House could use to determine whether Al-Maliki is a strong, trusted ally or a weak, duplicitous politician. Doubts and skepticism about his reliability are a source of deep concern to American planners.
Whether this government, the Maliki government, can act on it is absolutely critical. If it can't, then that government will not survive, and it will be impossible for the U.S. to move forward in Iraq.
To carry out the military component of the new strategy, President Bush is turning to a familiar face in Iraq, General David Petraeus. He's returning for the 3rd time to Iraq, this time as the top military commander of ground forces. Previously, he was responsible for training Iraq's fledgling armed forces. Now he will discover whether the forces he helped train will fight the upcoming battles or break down along sectarian fault lines. The stakes couldn't be higher.
But the alternatives of not trying to make this work are civil war, they are widespread disruption in the region.
President Bush's strategy to bring more American involvement in Iraq is striking a sour note with many Americans. 61% oppose sending more troops to Iraq, and many were hoping the president would deliver an exit strategy. In the final analysis, though, it's most likely that President Bush will exit the White House and the presidency before America ever leaves Iraq. Ayman Muhyiddin for Inside Iraq, Washington.
To understand the implication of the new surge in U.S. troops and to put it in proper perspective, I am joined by a diverse group of people. From Orlando, Florida, I am joined by General Jack Keane, a man widely credited to have influenced President Bush to send in more troops. Also with me here in the studio is Mr. Mark Schneider, a senior vice president of the International Crisis Group, and last but not least, Professor Michael Hudson, a Middle East expert with Georgetown University. Welcome to this special episode of Inside Iraq. General, why this plan is different than previous plans? Why should this one work while others have failed?
Well, first of all, we've over-relied on a political strategy here to get the results, and that is form a representative democracy. We don't have a representative democracy. I see intel reports on a regular basis that the Sunni insurgents have believed since 04 that they're winning. They certainly, enabled by the Al-Qaeda, provoked the Shia violence in 06 to frankly destroy the Iraqi government and create a failed state. If you want a political solution, you have to use some military force to get it for you. And by that I mean you have to bring the Sunnis to the table by forcing them to think that an armed conflict is not going to get the objectives that they want. They want to return to power. They want to treat the Shias as an underclass and subjects as they've done in the past. The only way you're going to change that thought is through force and take away the objectives they're achieving on the ground. In terms of the Shia militia, everybody's flogging Maliki and say, do something about the Shia militia. Look, the Shia militia waited 2.5 to 3 years for the Maliki government to protect them, for the United States and its coalition partners to protect them. The fact is, we did not. So no amount of flogging Maliki is going to stop the Shia militia until there's some evidence that the Shias are being protected. This plan is designed to protect the Sunnis and the Shias, and we will secure the population for the first time we've ever done that with the appropriate amount of resources. Then you can start to get political solutions. The whole objective of this is to get political solutions.
Mr. Schneider, so first we have to crack the whip before everybody sits down and starts talking. That's basically the premise of this new policy.
The problem with it is that it's sort of only cracking the whip on one side of the table, and it's essentially saying that we're only going to be cracking the whip on the Sunnis, and that's simply not going to work. One of the problems, which I think General Keane might comment on, is the concern that we've seen over the past several years is the increasing threat from the sectarian violence, in a sense instigated to some degree by the militias, who have become a significant part of the police force and therefore the Ministry of Interior security forces, and have carried out much of the violence through that mechanism. Don't you have to first clean that out before you are successful in demonstrating that the security forces are nonpartisan?
Mr. Keane?
The military operation will go into the 23 Sunni Shia mixed neighborhoods that have now been redesigned into new Iraqi districts, and they number 9. But the fact is, the military operation is going to be carried out, and the Sunnis and Shias are both going to be protected from what? From Al-Qaeda, from Sunni insurgents, from Shia death squads. So it is going to be an even-handed approach. And it is true that the police force is running rampant with people who are colluding with the Shia militia. Maliki has got to stamp that out. But this operation is not quite frank about it. And if they're going to be up to mischief here, there'll be shoot-to-kill orders for anybody that's interfering with the population in these areas, whether they be corrupt police or insurgents or the Al-Qaeda or militia or vigilante groups.
Muqtada Sadr and Jaish al-Mahdi recently, over the past 6 months perhaps, has emerged as the biggest threat to the stability in Iraq. Sadr City is a city of 2 million people, and yet this small force is supposed to go and go word by word or block by block in order to disband this militia?
This force is not going into Sadr City. What we're trying to do with Sadr City is resolve it politically. They waited 2.5 to 3 years before they came outside their barricades to inflict the level of violence that we all find rather horrific. What we're attempting to do here is in those 23 Shia Sunni neighborhoods, there's about 1,800,000 people, hundreds of thousands of Shias there. They will be protected. They will not need death squads or vigilante groups to protect them. They will not need the Badr Corps to protect them. They will not need Jaish al-Mahdi to protect them. What will protect them will be U.S. and Iraqi forces. After that is done for a number of weeks and months, it seems to me that we can resolve the Shia militia problem as it pertains to Sadr City politically. If that's not possible, then certainly we're prepared to resolve it militarily. The problem with the military problem is, why fight it unless you have to? If you start to deal with Jaish al-Mahdi, it'll unite the Badr Corps and also the vigilante groups, and those numbers are going to rise to about 70,000 people in an area that is densely populated. It appear to me militarily, while that's feasible to do, it's not very desirable. And if we can solve that problem politically, we should.
Mr. Mike Schneider, many critics already the day after the president's speech poured a lot of scorn and cold water on the president's speech. Why is that? Why is that?
For several reasons. First, it flies in the face of the recommendations of the Baker-Hamilton Commission, and it flies in the face of our own recommendations as well, that the focus had to be on dealing with the political problems underlying the sectarian conflict, and to bring the regional actors together in a major diplomatic surge, if you will, not a military surge. So there's a great deal of doubt about this effort. With essentially 20,000 troops more in Baghdad, remember, this is the fourth time that the administration has suggested and has increased to some degree the number of troops going into Baghdad.
But according to the president, this is the very first time when there will be enormous support from the Iraqi government. The Iraqi government, it seems that they have committed 9 brigades, military as well security and police, and this time no holds barred. The president says, you know, there will be no restrictions on our military operations and nobody is going to cry foul.
Well, two things. One, last summer the Iraqi government promised 4 to 6 brigades and wasn't able to deliver them. Essentially, those are the same brigades now that the U.S. is going to supply. And so rather than turn over responsibility to the Iraqi forces, you're seeing the U.S. take more responsibility. And second, one of the problems has been the makeup of the police itself, which has been heavily infiltrated, if you will, by militias. And so the question about whether they can play an independent role in dealing with both the Sunni insurgency and the Shia militias is really in doubt. That's why you see so much questioning taking place, and a clear indication now, not only from Democrats on the Hill, but from some Republicans as well, that there will be opposition to this move.
Professor Hudson, the president yesterday was extremely emphatic that he extracted all the necessary commitment from the Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri Al-Maliki. It seems that in that famous teleconferencing a few days ago, that the man vowed that this time he will come through for the U.S. What will happen if the man defaults back into or reneging on his promises again?
Well, first of all, I think it's possible that he will renege. We hear different signals coming out of the Iraqi leadership. On the one hand, yes, there's a formal acceptance of what President Bush is proposing, but on the other hand, we know that there is a lingering deep, not hostility perhaps, but concern about the Americans being too present, exercising too much control, and maybe possibly trying to bring in groups other than the top Shiite organizations, which the top Shiite organizations are not very keen on.
And yet, to give a credit to Prime Minister Al-Maliki, just a couple of days before the president's speech, he said, this time we will not distinguish between all the militias. You know, anybody who is carrying an arm will be a target of the Iraqi army. Is that more of the same, or this time he knows his seat as a prime minister will be on the line and the Americans simply will remove him?
Well, I think that he is aware that Mr. Bush is really turning the screws at this point. At the same time, Mr. Al-Maliki is a seasoned politician, and he knows that to appear to be kowtowing to American demands only reinforces the rather broad sense, which I think is shared among many parts of the Iraqi population, that the United States military is still an occupying, hostile force. And so he is whipsawed in terms of what his domestic political, and a complicated domestic political situation is, and the demands that are being made from Washington.
Mr. Schneider, both men, the president as well as Al-Maliki, they are buying time. Who has more time on his side?
I don't think either of them really have a lot of time on their side. The evidence of the last November election is that the American people are very, very distrustful and question this policy. And then on the other hand, within Iraq, as we've heard, there are increasing questions about Prime Minister Al-Maliki. The real issue is, remember that he is in power in part by virtue of the support of the Maqdad al-Sadr members of parliament. And so it's very doubtful that he's going to come down hard against them militarily.
The United States has its own plan. They are going with this new force. There is another big player in the region, and that is Iran. It's thwarting every possible move of the United States. It's emerged as the biggest winner. Let us just listen to what the president said yesterday regarding Iran, and then we'll take it from there.
This begins with addressing Iran and Syria. These two regimes are allowing terrorists and insurgents to use their territory to move in and out of Iraq. Iran is providing material support for attacks on American troops. We will disrupt the attacks on our forces. We will interrupt the flow of support from Iran and Syria. and we will seek out and destroy the networks providing advanced weaponry and training to our enemies in Iraq.
General, not only the US president blasted Iran, but the second military man in Iraq, General Raymond Odierno, just as recent as last week, he said we confiscated a big cache of Katyusha rockets and military supply wares, as well as high-tech generating from Iran with the marking of the Iranian government. Do you think that the next phase we will see a stepped-up effort by Iran in order to perhaps make the president regret sending more troops?
Well, I think what the Iranians will probably do is let this operation unfold. Listen, they're in Iraq, they're in Baghdad. There are certainly lines of communication that are open for the movement of people, money, equipment, and explosives. We will do everything that we can militarily to deal with that reality. But I think what their strategy would be to wait to see how this unfolds, see if this operation fails, and then they'll be able to exploit it. If it succeeds, I would imagine they would try to rheostat the violence and increase it rather significantly through their own proxy forces that are inside Baghdad.
That is very interesting, General Jack Keane. Let me here welcome a military author as well as an analyst, Mr. Michael Isikoff, who wrote a New York bestseller, Hubris, and he is with us here in the studio.
One of the reasons that that we didn't have enough troops to begin with, one of the arguments that was being made by Secretary Rumsfeld, among others, was that the larger the U.S. presence, the bigger the U.S. footprint, the more risk that it was going to engender hostility and sort of remind the Iraqi populace that there was an American occupation. And that was always the risk every time you talk about increasing troop strength. We can go back and argue whether that was the correct call back in 2003, and I think the answer of the verdict of history is it wasn't, it was wrong, but it was not an insubstantial argument. It was not an argument without some merit, and one has to, when trying to calculate what the impact of this surge is going to be, remember that there were some legitimate reasons to be wary of too big of an American presence and wonder whether, in fact, that reaction, that backlash may occur again.
Professor Hudson, if quantity has a quality all of its own, why more troops will not help in stabilizing Iraq? Many people, they say this is a dribble, this is not enough. Perhaps you need more than 100,000. The U.S. Army, as recent as last month, issued its own counterinsurgency manuals and says that per 1,000 of the population, you need 20 counterinsurgents, i.e., just to stabilize Baghdad, you need 100,000 soldiers.
Well, and the author of that counterinsurgency report, the principal author, is in fact the new U.S. commander on the ground, General Petraeus. So General Petraeus, who is a very smart man, is going into a very tough situation, and he's smart enough to know, I think, from his own analysis, that he's not going in with enough force. And not only is the quantity perhaps insufficient at this moment, the next question is how long do you have to have this surging force present?
Well, let's pose that to General Jack Keane. Is this mission going to be, what, 6 months, a year? A lot of people say in order to stabilize Iraq completely, you actually need about 8 to 10 years. The U.S. certainly does not have 8 to 10 years.
Well, look, first of all, as to the question of the size of the force, when you do the analysis on what we really need to work with, and that's initially the Shia-Sunni neighborhoods, the population there is about 1.8 million. The size of the force is based on being able to provide adequate security for them, and also if we have to deal with Sadr City. I've done the analysis myself. Petraeus has looked at it. He knows that the size of the force is more than adequate to deal with this. That's number one. So I think we should put size of force aside. Now the other thing is the enemy votes, and the enemy will react to what we're doing. The problem we've had with the initial strategy is the enemy raised the level of violence beyond the capacity for the Iraqi military and police to cope with it. And that was the essence of our strategy, that they would cope with it. So the enemy is going to do something here. We have to be prepared for that reality. General Petraeus, if he feels he needs more forces, believe me, he will ask for those forces. He's not going to hold back. He understands what this is all about. As to the length of the operation, in terms of securing the population in Baghdad and also in Al-Anbar provinces and some of the other major contested areas, in my judgment, we're looking at 18 months to 2 years to be able to bring the level of violence down to a point where the Iraqi security forces have the capacity to cope with it, which was the initial intent from the beginning. And I believe then that we can start to move our forces out of the country.
Yeah, I wonder if I can ask General Keane a question here, because I think I just heard him say that if General Petraeus needs more troops, he will certainly ask for them. Would you expect that that the president, given the current political climate, can approve additional troops beyond this 20,000 at this point?
Look, one of the problems we have had from the beginning is if you're a military commander and you're facing an opponent, you put down on the table what the price of victory is to deal with that opponent and what the risks are associated with your force to do that. Your national leadership has to deal with political will, national will, and other challenges in the region that may have implications based on your requirements are. I'm telling you what the military commander will do if he needs to solve that problem with additional resources. I cannot predict what the president will do.
But you realize how that sounds to people. That, you know, that is a sort of eerie parallel to the whole Vietnam situation, where each escalation only required additional troops being brought. And if that's what's being talked about, you know, maybe people such as yourself who are advocating ought to be more forthright and forthcoming, saying, hey, it's not just 20,000, it may be 50,000, it may be another 100,000, and it could be a lot longer than anything the president was talking about last night.
No, that's not what I said. Don't turn around what I said.
I'm just asking.
I mean, the fact is, let me finish. Now I'm answering.
Okay.
The fact is that based on the situation we have there right now, we have the adequate force levels to deal with it. But what I mentioned is that the enemy has options, and while we've considered those options, not all of those are predictable. And that's the truth of it. There's a fair amount of uncertainty when you're dealing with irregular warfare. And that's one of the realities that we've been facing in the 3+ years that are there. I'm just suggesting that in the kit bag of any military commander, if he needs more resources, you know, this general will ask for it. Do I think we'll need those resources to do what's in front of us? My judgment is no. But certainly that is a possibility. And I also think what will happen is we'll see some success here after 4 or 5 months. Success in a way that we've not seen in the last 3 years. And that's a different quotient entirely.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion. Stay with us.